For over 2 years, this game has been branded as a scam. The owner and sole developer dragged through the mud from multiple YouTube channels, and a community that believed that they were tricked. This story begins where many of the most interesting ones do. Kickstarter, a story of lies, censorship, arrogance, greed, the power of influencer marketing, and possibly redemption. A campaign that asked for $12,000, but instead reached 12,000 backers, and a level of notoriety that still haunts the project to this day. This is the story of Day of Dragons. September 2nd, 2019, Day of Dragons appeared on Kickstarter using the studio name Be Awesome Games, a totally faceless developer with no additional information available anywhere you look. The campaign's presentation was simple and yet had an intriguing concept. Play as a dragon in a world where other players are also dragons, fly around the survival sandbox breathing fire, spitting acid, turning invisible, and growing from a newborn hatchling all the way to an adult. If you can survive, of course. No trailer, just a few short paragraphs and a short video showing flight mechanics, and a section explaining the reason for the campaign's existence. The reason given was very obvious, you could guess this one. They need money. The paragraph claims that development has been an ongoing process since 2017, meaning they had 2 years of work already implemented, and of course the use of the term "we" would lead people to believe this was 2 years of multiple developers. The video included in the campaign page showed impressive graphics. It also had gameplay of a baby dragon hatching from an egg before running around a desert terrain and taking flight in what appeared on surface level to be a fairly well put together game. This video clearly led potential backers to believe the campaign was worthy of their confidence, and most importantly, worthy of their hard-earned money, and so the initial goal of $12,000 was reached in just under 6 days. Despite the campaign reaching this number very quickly, there were a lot of questions that needed answers. One such question that anyone familiar with game development would be asking is, why $12,000? What can you do with such a small sum of money that would help to realise a full game release? The campaign of course addressed this concern right out of the gate. Quote, "Why only $12,000? Well, we could use a lot more than that, but $12,000 is the bare minimum we need. If we raise more, then great, even more content. But we need at least 12k. In retrospect, there would be a lot to unpack in this short sentence, but most important to this part of the story, there was no we at this stage. It was a sole developer, or somebody claiming to be a developer. Shortly after the Kickstarter campaign appeared and started to see some success, an official Discord server emerged, created by the lead developer for Be Awesome Games, a man named Jonathan Slabau, who would come to be known as Jayo. Day of Dragons' budding community began to familiarise themselves with Jayo, who became incredibly active in the server, discussing anything and everything related to the game and the future plans. He was hosting live Q&A sessions both in text and in voice, showing up in videos with content creators attempting to bring further eyeballs to the project, and discussing concepts of what the future would hold for Day of Dragons. Of course, the more Jayo spoke, the more information he was giving to the public that could then be used to critically analyse him and the project. A very common practice when judging anything related on public funding is to Google the creators and see how experienced they are, or if they've ever been involved in anything unsavoury. However, Jayo would not show up on any of these searches. Despite knowing his alleged identity, no one could find anything out about him other than what he told them, and something wasn't adding up. Jayo was and still is a ghost online. No social media, no prior work history, nothing. Now this is not the most uncommon thing in the world and not an immediate cause for concern, but combined with the red flags that I'm going to present to you in this video, it was a big indicator that trouble may be ahead. Before the controversies though, first we have to discuss what exactly Jayo wanted and what he wanted it for. The goal for the Kickstarter campaign was set at this very specific number of $12,000 for a single purpose. When the initial $12,000 goal was hit, Jayo posted an update on Kickstarter stating this allowed for the hiring of a 3D artist. On the last day of the campaign, Jayo posted the following quote, "Today is the last day of our campaign. I thought by this day we might reach 12k. I wasn't even sure if 12k was asking too much, but that's what I needed to get 3 new dragons added to replace the current 3, each of which was made by a different artist." End quote. This is information nobody knew prior to handing over their money. It did, however, reinforce the idea that the game must be fairly far along in development and almost ready to launch. They didn't need money for programming, they didn't need money for networking, for a whole new art style, they just needed to replace 3 dragons, and then the game that was promised would be delivered in short order. That, however, is not really what happened. On December 4th, 2019, just 2 months after the campaign's monumental success, Day of Dragons released on Steam Early Access with a whole lot of controversy. The game retailed for $20 US, and to call the content available limited would be extremely generous. You could select a server, select from 3 dragons, and then spawn on a completely barren map, populated by almost no life at all, either AI or otherwise. If you survived long enough, you would grow to the size required to fly, and at that point, you pretty much enjoyed all the game mechanics on display for the brief period you were connected to the server, as the game did not come equipped with persistence, meaning you logged out of the server and you returned at square one. None of your progress was saved on the server, and at that point, you'd seen everything that your $20 price of entry would afford you. And of course, the entire goal of the original campaign to replace those 3 dragon assets was unfulfilled. The dragons in the launch version of the game were the exact same ones that were available in the demo that was posted on the Kickstarter page for people to look at. At this point, you would have to ask, how exactly did a game in this state manage to reach such a large audience, raise so much money, and where exactly did that money go? To answer those questions, we have to go back in time. We have to go back to the start of the campaign and look at how exactly they raised the money and what red flags people found throughout. Within the first few days of the campaign going live, things were going surprisingly well for Be Awesome Games and Day of Dragons. They were raising anywhere from $300 to $1,800 each day, and on track to hit their goal with ease, though unlikely to go drastically higher. Then, a very convenient coincidence that would change everything for the campaign's future. Harry Potter Wizards Unite mobile game launched an event titled Day of Dragons. Now, users searching for this event were greeted with a Kickstarter campaign for a game all about living your days as a dragon. From the start of this miraculously timed event on September 7th until September 12th, the campaign raised over $50,000, although this was not the most beneficial impact that these additional eyeballs would provide. Articles started to circulate discussing the well-timed events and drawing even more attention to Day of Dragons' crowdfunding page. Some of these headlines, as well as Jayo reaching out to people, would eventually attract content creators ever on the prowl for the next cool game to begin their coverage. Day of Dragons was, on surface level, a unique survival game, and there are always people looking for that combination. The crowdfunding explosion would come on September 13th, 2019, when a channel called Anthomnia made a video titled, quote, "Hatch from an Egg and Grow a Dragon, the next survival game of 2019, Day of Dragons gameplay." Within 2 days, the funding had doubled, and by the end of the campaign, it reached $533,890. This was over $510,000 more than what Be Awesome Games claimed to need to just replace these 3 dragon assets. But somehow, it wasn't ever enough for Jayo.
Textured, animated, the sound effects, particle effects, the visual effects, all that stuff, when it's all totaled up, it's going to be about $10,000 each. So the 30 dragons, there's 300,000 of the 500,000 in Kickstarter funding. The soundtrack's $30,000, so it's actually over 30,000, more like $35,000. So there's $335,000 right there, and that's just for the dragons and the soundtrack. On top of that, you have lawyers, taxes, accountant that all want money. So when you total all of that up together, and not counting the expense, the money I've already put into the game, the taxes, that's going to be about 30%. So how much money do I have left after I pay for all this stuff? Not very much. And then once I put the game on Steam, Steam's going to take a 30% cut right off the top. The government's going to take another 30%, and then you got sales tax on top of that I have to pay. Per sale, I'm going to get maybe $6 to $8 maybe for every $20 copy that's sold. There's still other expenses and costs. So who's out there calling me a money grubber?
It's not uncommon for Kickstarter campaigns to add stretch goals once they see unexpected success. A stretch goal being a reward or a promise that you will fulfill should the community fund your project to that next breakpoint of raised capital. However, Jayo would take this a few steps further, and in ways that were directly harmful to his initial backers. Jayo added extra tiers of packages to the Kickstarter store with more exclusive rewards not included in the other packages already purchased, meaning if you were an early Kickstarter supporter, there were rewards you just didn't get, even if you backed at a higher tier originally, unless you bought another pack. Alongside this, Jayo released a quote standalone DLC dragon called the Acid Spitter that came free with all Steam purchasers, but backers on Kickstarter had to buy this dragon for $10 in addition to the package they bought to support the game to this point, even if they paid $225. Jayo didn't stop there though. He was already talking about merchandise, selling merch of Day of Dragons, and of course DLCs for a game that hadn't released at this stage. Jayo originally asked for $12,000 to replace those 3 dragons, and before those dragons were even replaced, he was already talking about adding more as DLC, which people would have to pay for. He was now even saying that $500,000 is going to go very quickly, and that's why he needs to monetize more elements of the game. The game that at this point consisted entirely of store-bought assets and not a single line of original code if allegations are to be believed. Now we're going to have to go back to the very beginning and look at the evidence people presented that branded Jayo and Day of Dragons as a scam. A vocal portion of the community were convinced all was not as it seemed. Due to them being vocal, however, the moderation policy on official Day of Dragons social media became overwhelming very early on. Questions that could in any way be construed as negative or critical were met with immediate bans and a label of troll attached to anyone asking.
More of a concern, actually. You say that the dragons that you have included in your game are custom for your game, but they're store-bought assets.
It's not a scam. I didn't, put 2 years of my life into this thing so I could scam people.
But what have you been working on for story?
I mean, I'm sure the 2 years included the coding of the game.
Unless there is stuff that has not been shown, as far as coding wise, all of the coding in the game right now could be.
Who are you? But if you don't mind me asking,
it doesn't matter who I am. I'm not the focus.
Who you are. If you've coded before, that means you're part of some other project.
I don't need you to believe me or not.
Why so hostile? Whoever's asking the question.
And I don't mean to be rude, but I'm not here to be interrogated by other developers making other games. Community people, if you all have legitimate concerns, I'm here to answer them.
Discord was in lockdown from these so-called trolls. The result was information gathered elsewhere in Google Documents, new Discord servers, and even websites, created with the sole purpose of documenting the concerns that were worthy of immediate censorship. On October 14, 2019, a YouTuber by the name of IGP released a video titled The Truth About Day of Dragons, in which many of these red flags were compiled. The first and most common amongst Kickstarter scam projects was that the entire demo and video accompanying the campaign was an asset flip with absolutely zero custom code. It was a handful of assets purchased from the marketplace and mashed together, resulting in a couple of maps you could run around in as a dragon without things like basic sound. The demo that only content creators got to play and the footage that was on the Kickstarter campaign were the only things that the developer had to show for the apparent 2 years of work. Alongside these glaring issues, there are accusations that Jayo was presenting concept art to the community that he didn't actually own the rights to. Now, despite adamant claims his game used all custom code, Jayo refused to show any new gameplay or a single line of this custom code. He also refused to hire additional developers, despite the fact that he'd raised much more money. He wanted to be the sole developer. At this time, a decompiled version of the demo was circulating which showed 4 custom lines of code in the entire program, where there should usually have been thousands. In fact, the demo that Jayo presented at this time was so easy to replicate that IGP's video titled The Truth About Day of Dragons did not show any gameplay of Day of Dragons. Instead, it showed a replica game thrown together by another content creator called IcyCaress, who has no prior game development knowledge. IcyCaress managed to replicate what Day of Dragons was at this stage so closely that nobody even noticed, and he did this with a handful of hours and no experience. This of course became a particular sore spot for Jayo, who would repeatedly call the game a rip-off while trying to demonstrate how much more complex his systems were to that of the said rip-off. He did this with blurred screenshots that could be of literally anything. Instead of trying to prove these content creators wrong, he put his effort into something that would surely legitimize himself to the world: threats and committing perjury in an attempt to silence the critics. Legal threats are not that common in the world of YouTube, even for creators such as myself who investigate and expose developers acting badly in games or in cryptocurrency and things like that. Actual legal cases being levied against creators are even rarer. I can speculate as to why this is: the money involved, the difficulty in proving defamation, understanding that any threats you make will only add legitimacy to their claims, and perhaps show that you are scared of what they have to say. Whatever the reason may be, it is rare. Jayo, however, tried every method he could to silence the people who were relaying information that all may not be as it seems at Be Awesome Games. The process began with a letter released to the public simply titled Day of Dragons Public Response. In this response, Jayo writes the following, quote, "Thus, in connection with the public statement, we are sending cease and desist letters to both IcyCaress and IGP, requesting that they remove the categorically false information that they have circulated through YouTube and social media, and to acknowledge the falsity of the information that they have perpetuated. If this continues, we will have no choice but to consider further action." And further action is exactly what was taken. To discuss the severity of these claims, first I must explain what a DMCA claim is and how it works. From the creator's side, getting copyright striked is a potentially career-ending and business-destroying decision. 3 strikes on your account and YouTube will just permanently remove you from the platform, meaning your channel, which could have hundreds of thousands, millions of followers, could cease to exist overnight, and with it, the owner's full-time job. From the copyright holder's perspective, when someone uses your copyright, you have the option to attempt to take down of said copyright using a legal process that involves the signing of documents outlining you understand the system, you own the copyright, and this is of course under the penalty of perjury. When sending a DMCA via YouTube, YouTube will typically comply with the takedown, no questions asked, and then await appeals. But in cases where the DMCA comes from an unknown holder and lacks details, they may ask for additional information before taking down the content. Jayo, however, did not own the content he was striking. As we previously established, he was using the work of others which he purchased a license to use, but not to own outright. His arguments eventually boiled down to YouTubers showing images he purchased on a monetized channel, and therefore they profited from his work with the ad revenue, which would typically fall under fair use as a defense. YouTube decided in Jayo's case that the information he provided and the arguments he raised were completely without merit, and instead dismissed the claims. Now, if you know anything about DMCAs in YouTube, this is an extremely rare occurrence and should indicate just how thin his arguments of copyright infringement truly were. If this situation had progressed and it required a defense, the images that he was claiming were from an artist who made drawings prior to Jayo even hiring him, and were in fact being used by Jayo originally to illustrate progress on the game as a concept that didn't even exist. At this point, with the threats made and the copyright claims brushed aside, Jayo's attempts to silence the critics was dead in the water. However, the content creators had run out of steam. Everything that was to be talked about had already been said. They talked about the game, they talked about Jayo, the legal threats, etc., and it was time to move on. In most circumstances, when the topic of a deep dive video like this is a Kickstarter project, you rarely even have a game to talk about. Day of Dragons, however, delivered on a game, and they delivered very early, despite the claims that this was a scam. In the time between the initial release in 2019 and January 2022 when I record this, the game's received multiple patches and it now sees a consistent player base. The major criticisms about Day of Dragons have remained pretty consistent throughout. The game lacks polish, and there's almost zero content. As I record this video, the review score shows mostly positive, with 72% of people giving the title a thumbs up despite still being in early access. The positive reviews still often mention issues that have existed since the first iteration back in 2019, and the negatives still call it a scam. As for the 3 dragons that Jayo needed $12,000 to make, well, there's 2 custom dragon models in the game now, one of which you need to buy as a DLC. Despite the $530,000 raised publicly and the thousands of copies sold for $20 each on the Steam store, The game has seen very little actual progress, and Jayo stayed true to his word, remaining the sole developer according to the credits. As of now, the game regularly sees a couple hundred players online at peak times, and the outlook remains optimistic for those who always believed in Jayo's vision. The videos claiming the project a scam or just discussing the many issues with the development remain as a testament to the drama that Jayo found himself involved in. Although you will struggle to find almost any update videos regarding this project in the last year from the people who initially covered it. Day of Dragons is a project that was funded by sheer coincidence. It got way more exposure and money than it deserved or could handle, and was headed by a man who continually lied, or at least misrepresented the project's current situation, while doing everything he could to silence any forms of criticism. The game that exists right now, as of early 2022, shows very little evidence it will ever be a finished product, and even less evidence of a competent lead developer to get it there. It will, however, continue to progress, which is more than you can say for many projects that have a similar story. If we were to remove the exposure, the theatrics, the drama of extensive coverage, the poking and prodding from all sides, what you have here is no different than a few hundred other early access or Kickstarter titles. A misrepresentation to raise money by someone doing so either with malicious intent or delusions of their capability. The difference is that while Day of Dragons may still be a poor game by the metrics I'd use to judge one with so much money and time invested, it is still trying to deliver on promises made. The question then becomes, which side of the fence do you fall on with all this information? Was Jayo's Day of Dragons a scam from the outset? Is delivering on a minimum viable product that still sees updates enough to absolve him of the title after having acted as he did throughout? Or on the flip side, is this a case of YouTubers jumping the gun and backing a solo developer into a corner? I'm not going to answer that for you, but you now have what I believe is enough information to make your own conclusion from here. I tried to keep this entirely opinion free throughout, so you can make your own judgment and just enjoy the story. As always, leave me a like and a comment if you do enjoy this style of content. They are incredibly long-winded to research and put together, and doing those things helps the video get play in the algorithm, which of course incentivizes me to do more like it. Subscribe if you enjoy the content, hopefully more to come in the near future. Check out the links in the video description to support me further, Patreon if you want to throw some coins to your boy, Twitch, Twitter and Discord to join the conversation or recommend some content topics to me, and special thanks to all the people who do support the channel with things like Patreon, Twitch and YouTube memberships. I appreciate you all. I hope to see you on the next one. Stay safe out there. We out. Peace.